Welcome everyone to our every other month now National ACT virtual meetup. I know some of you had joined us about 15 minutes ago when we were doing our little planning session and I inadvertently started the webinar. For those of you just joining us, please note that this is the first time we shifted over from our GoToWebinar platform, and we're using Zoom now for the first time. And so we're also kind of as a team sort of learning some of the ins and outs of the Zoom webinar. And I think some of you are as well. So we'll make sure that we go through and do a little housekeeping and kind of orient you all to Zoom. Even if you are used to Zoom meetings, the webinars are a little bit different from that. So just a quick look at our topics for today, our agenda. We're going to be starting out with some quick introductions. It's really nice to see all of the places that people are from. So if you're just joining us and you haven't put your name and kind of your organization and where you're from, please feel free to do that in the chat. We're excited to have a special guest today, Piper Meyer-Kalos, who will be talking about using compensatory and adaptive cognitive strategies within ACT. We will also spend about 30 minutes or so, kind of the last portion of our time together today, to do what we call open mic. And so I'll kind of walk you through sort of how to do that in terms of raising your hand, and we'll unmute you. And then just a quick wrap up. We usually try to do an evaluation at the very end. We really appreciate all of the feedback that you give us, and often we build our future topics based on your feedback to us. And just a reminder that unlike sort of the past year, we're now meeting every other month instead of every month. And the next meeting is not till 2022, and that will be January 3rd, again, 3 to 4:30 Eastern, so it's the same time frame. Okay, just a quick couple of notes about housekeeping before we get started. Due to our large audience, all the attendees are muted, and you're not appearing on video. Even when we have you raise your hand and unmute you, we won't be showing video of you during that time. The chat box and the QA box will be visible to everyone. The presentation right now is being recorded, and the recording will be made available on our website in a few weeks, and you'll receive an email from Zoom with a link to where the recording is posted, along with the slides and the other materials posted on our website today. We also posted in the chat a link to today's slides and some materials that Piper is going to be presenting on. So you might have to scroll up for those. Using the chat. So if you're experiencing any technical issues, go ahead and use the chat and our staff will assist you. There may be some times where, like Piper says, you know, hey, give me some feedback on this, or tell me a little bit about this. We kind of are asking for you to kind of give a response. So you can put those into the chat, or if you have a comment, you can put those into the chat. But if you have a question, be sure to put that into the Q&A box, because that helps us to know you're looking to us to answer that in some way, whether it's live or typing in a response. If you put a question into the chat, we can't actually copy and paste it and put it into the Q&A. So it's really important that you go ahead and put it into the Q&A box separately. And I already said that about basically the Q&A box. So, and again, feel free to put that in anytime you want. If something comes to you and you want to ask a question about it, we may find a strategic time to address your question, but feel free to do that anytime. And again, during our open mic time at the very end is a great time to do that. You'll just want to make sure you click on the raise my hand, and then we'll look for you and unmute you at that time. All right, quick introductions of us. I know some of you have been spending quite a bit of time with us since the pandemic, when we first started these calls, excuse me, in March of 2020. I'm Maria Monroe-DeVita, and I'm at the University of Washington and represent the Northwest Mental Health Technology Transfer Center, which provides training and consultation to the Northwest region of the US. I'm also a TMACT ACT Fidelity tool co-developer, along with my partner in crime, who will introduce herself here in a second. And I provide a lot of training and consultation to, I think, many of your teams, actually, as I look at the participant list and see many familiar faces here. And I'll turn it over to you, Lorna, to introduce yourself.
Yeah, so we had revised this slide because we realized our introductions overlap so much that we just needed a little list to basically just point to each other. So I'm Lorna Moser, and I'm the director of the Institute for Best Practices at UNC Chapel Hill. And together we have been doing a lot of work across the nation around training and providing technical assistance and teaching how to use the TEAM Act for evaluations of act fidelity. So again, it's great to see so many familiar people on here. And again, creating an opportunity for us to bring you all together so you guys can kind of offer your own peer mentorship along with hearing from experts on topics like we have with Piper joining us today.
Yeah, and so that brings us to Piper. I don't know if there was anything else you wanted to say, Lorna, now or wait till a little bit later.
No.
No. Okay.
Oh, yes. Sorry. I'm like, we were talking earlier about, this is very timely given some of the content that Piper will be presenting on, but Aaron Beck, a psychiatrist that is probably a familiar name for all of you, he passed away today at the age of 100. And he is somebody that really brought forward, along with Dr. Ellis, what became known as cognitive behavioral therapy. And CBT is such an important framework of so many ways in which we support and treat people with a full range of different types of challenges, including psychosis. So some of you may have come to learn about CBT for psychosis, which isn't quite the Beck Institute. They have their own version of recovery cognitive therapy, but altogether, really just in terms of like somebody who really breaks the ground with some new way of thinking and implementation of something. I mean, Dr. Beck definitely was it. So wanted to kind of acknowledge his passing today.
Yeah, momentous at the age of 100.
100
years old. All right, so we're going to shift over to our main presenter today. And again, for those of you who are just joining us, for a long time here, we've been focusing a lot of our topics more specifically on helping ACT teams address the COVID-19 pandemic. And we thought, when we started kind of this new year with our Training and Technical Assistance Center, that we were going to shift gears into kind of more standard ACT topics. But of course, a couple months ago, with the Delta variant being, pretty big, obviously, in our country and really wreaking havoc on much of the work that we're doing, and also thinking about kind of the impact of vaccines and vaccine mandates and different perspectives on masking and that kind of thing, we kind of kept it at the forefront last month. We may come back to it here and there, and today you all might have some questions still about navigating the pandemic, but I think we can kind of officially say at least that today's topic, we're really trying to drive kind of ourselves back into some of the basics of the kinds of strategies that we really want to encourage intervention within ACT. And so with that, I bring you Piper Meyer-Kalos. I'm going to say a little bit about our dear friend and colleague here, who we've known for a very long time. So Piper Meyer-Kalos is an assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at the University of Minnesota. She's also a licensed clinical psychologist. Her work focuses on the development of psychosocial interventions for people with early psychosis and schizophrenia. She is also interested in developing treatment approaches that integrate positive psychology approaches to enhance recovery. She has trained ACT teams nationally in psychosocial interventions, including CBT for psychosis, and was part of the development team of the Navigate intervention for people with first episode psychosis. So I now turn it over to you, Piper. Thanks for joining us today.
Well, thank you for having me. I appreciate this opportunity. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully this will all work smoothly. There we go. All right. So I'm going to, I will try to stop every now and again just to ask if there are any sorts of questions that have popped up. So, but if I don't, feel free to just, ask me if we need to, if there's a pressing question. So what I'm going to talk about today is I'm going to try to talk about something that most of you with the population that you're working with have encountered, and you may not have realized that you encountered, but I bet most of you have. I want to talk a little bit about the cognitive difficulties that people, particularly with schizophrenia, face. And I'm also going to talk a little bit about social cognition as well, because I think it really factors into this as well. And my guess is that all of you have encountered this with the people you've worked with at some time or another. But here's the thing, you may not have realized that that may have been really what was going on. So I want to start by kind of talking a little bit about what that looks like and defining that for you. And then what I really want to do today is talk about resources you may not know that are actually available and out there for you that you can easily start to incorporate into your practice right away. And so that's the thing about that we don't often talk enough about the cognitive difficulties that people face, and talk about the strategies within some of the common frameworks that we teach skills that are actually available. So part of what I included when I sent out a copy of the slides is I included some resources that are available, and I'm going to talk about that I just wanted to go ahead and share with you. And then I'll talk about another resource that it's available for purchase that some colleagues of ours have developed, and I've got some additional resources for that. That's my hope, is I'm going to talk about, so I'll talk about those resources. I'll talk about how you can integrate them into your current work. And then I'll talk about how an ACT team is really poised very well with all the different areas that you interact with treatment to really address some of these issues as they come up in your practice. Okay, so I'm going to repeat this slide at the end, but I really wanted to emphasize these are and they're just three of the resources, and they're common ones that I know about and I think are really make sense to incorporate with the work that you do on an ACT team. So I'm going to talk about a resource that's included within the Navigate Supported Employment and Education Manual. So within there, there's a whole section on coping with cognitive difficulties. I actually pulled that section out for you, and that's part of the resources that I've included. There's a whole topic in illness management and recovery in one of the newer versions of IMR that's on dealing with social cognition. So I pulled that topic out so you could see what that was like. And then now some colleagues of ours have developed a book around called Thinking Skills for Work. And so I've put that link in there, and that's available for purchase. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the resources that are involved in there. So the slide is repeated at the end, but I just wanted to kind of point them out that these are things that we encounter often. And there's actually some common things that are some tools available that we can use to integrate into what we do. So let's talk about, what does this look like? How, when you encounter it, what are the things that you might notice? So these are the common cognitive difficulties that we often will see in people with schizophrenia. So these are things like attention and concentration, which somebody might report that they have difficulties when it comes to being able to sit down and read a book. Especially, I work with young people who may have early on in their illness, and they'll talk about how it changed, that since they had that experience, they're not able to go back and read or concentrate in the way that they remember they used to. So that's a common thing that we'll hear. These are things with thinking speed. So an example of that might be using a touch screen on a computer to order something. Think about the processing speed that's involved if you have to do that, and how you might be slowed down if you're struggling with some of that. Things about memory, so remembering a phone number or an appointment time, or where you're supposed to show up for an appointment, or things like that. And then one of the biggest ones that oftentimes I don't think we realize the amount of mental operation that it takes, but something we call executive functioning, which is really planning, organization, and problem solving, and even comes down to like judgment. That is all wrapped up into executive functioning. And this is things like arriving on time, despite a change in the train or the bus schedule, being able to plan where to go and how to get there, and being able to change that plan if something changes from your original plan. That's executive functioning. If you look at this list of things, my guess is all of you have encountered individuals who've experienced some or all of these problems. So what do those common treatments look like? We usually talk about them, and they've been researched in two different ways. One is more of kind of trying to restore some of those cognitive problems or reduce those difficulties through something called cognitive remediation. I'm not going to talk about cognitive remediation today. This is where, and if you've ever seen it, that's why I put a picture up there. It's usually a pack of what looks like computer games, but they're actually tasks that people would do repeatedly that improve things like processing speed and memory and attention and those kinds of things. And the research has shown that you do these over a certain amount of time, and people after they're exposed to them can show improvements in those areas. Now, what you may not know is in that new book that I mentioned, the Thinking Skills for Work, they talk about a package called CogPack, and that's what they used in the studies for on thinking skills for work that you can use and you can actually get access to. That's pretty new. So, again, if that's something that your program, your team, your agency might be interested, I would encourage you to check it out, because it is something that's new. And there's really good research now that's really beginning to come out about the value of some of that. What I'm going to talk about and focus a little bit more is, if we notice these things, what can we do in treatment that kind of bypasses that cognitive deficit or compensates for it, right? We think of them as adaptive or what we call compensatory strategies. And these are very similar to the ways that we teach skills training. We do skills training. And if you've ever done that with an individual, you can do that and apply it to the cognitive difficulties that I was mentioning earlier. So the piece that I wanted to add a little bit is how this relates to social functioning, because there's good research now that states that basically those basic thinking abilities that I was talking about actually are related and can cause difficulties related to social functioning as well. And that neurocognitive remediation that I was mentioning, those are exercises to improve that, with the hope of also improving social functioning. However, there's a newer area, newer is relative, I should say, that really focuses on that secondary part of that social functioning. And this is something we call social cognition. And again, my guess is every one of you know exactly what I'm kind of talking about here, but may not necessarily know this term. So it simply means the mental operations underlying social interactions. So think about what kinds of mental operations you may be performing when you're in a social situation, from reading somebody's emotions to reacting them to trying to figure out how somebody might be thinking or feeling. This is what we call social cognition. This is also one of those things that we know people with schizophrenia struggle with, right? That it's a common problem that they face. And there's really interesting research in this area that talks about what does that look like? In what areas is it most impaired? And now intervention-wise, what can we do about it? We do know that link we're talking about between neurocognition and now social cognition and social functioning, there's a strong link there as well. So I wanted to include it because I do think there's a resource that's out there, but I wanted to kind of give you that context where we think about neurocognition as kind of manipulating objective information. Social cognition is more about making those guesses about non-objective information. So that might be somebody else's thoughts or feelings. And there's three ways that we kind of think about these domains in people with schizophrenia that seem to be impaired the most often. So this is emotion perception. So that ability to infer what somebody might be thinking or how they're feeling from their facial, most oftentimes, right? Theory of mind, which is kind of perspective taking, right? How do we assume what somebody might be thinking and feeling? And then attributional style is, you can think about those tendencies that people have to explain the behavior of other people. And think about it as, we talk about it as jumping to conclusions, right? Have you ever known anyone who, when they're out in the world, they automatically have these stories that come up repeatedly for them? That person is dangerous, the world is dangerous, these kinds of things, these kind of patterns that come up that they make these assumptions about. That's another thing that we know that can be commonly a problem in people with schizophrenia. Okay, so these are the two areas that I kind of wanted to point out and just have you kind of think about the kinds of things that you've noticed in the people that you work with and where you might see that they run into problems commonly when things come up in their functioning. So I'm going to pause here for a minute to see if there's any questions before I move to the next section. We good?
I think we don't have any in the Q&A right now.
Okay, perfect. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to talk about some resources and strategies that you can use to address those neurocognitive difficulties first. Then we'll talk about a resource for the social cognitive difficulties. So one of the things to think about that you have at the ready, I feel like, for addressing neurocognitive difficulties is using something called behavioral tailoring. Now, that's a really fancy term. I'm going to go into kind of the steps of this. All of you, I guarantee all of you have used behavioral tailoring, whether you know that word or not. And it's something that you can actually do to help people kind of come up with those compensatory strategies or even adaptive strategies for cognition as well. So all it means is that you're establishing a support or modifying the environment to cue or direct behavior. Okay, it's one of those things, if you've ever taught somebody to use a pillbox, you've probably done some behavioral tailoring, right? This idea where you've come up with an adaptive strategy and it cues them to do what? To remember to take their medication. Okay, that's what we're talking about. And it can be, again, we're going to kind of address both compensatory and adaptive and talk a little bit about that. So these are the steps, and I'm going to kind of walk you through this, but essentially you start out by identifying what's going on, what kind of impairment they have in their activity of daily living, exploring the routine, which is a really important and helpful thing. If you don't know what the routine is, it's hard to find something that you can then cue, right? So you got to know what is it that they're doing when that activity that's impaired, what is that normal progression of things that they're doing? What does that normally look like? Then you want to develop a strategy to signal that behavior event, right? If we think about the pillbox, that pillbox is the signal and it's already set in there for them, and they just pop up the tab and they know they're supposed to take their medicine. So you want to have some sort of strategy to signal that. Then you want to model it for them, right? What does that look like? This should be very familiar for any of you who've used skills training. Engage some person in the role play of that routine, get them to practice that. Set up some way for them to practice it once they leave your office, or if you're with them, some way to practice once you leave and aren't around to help cue them. And then you want to follow up when you come back to see how well it's working, because it's often it needs to be adapted, right? That's behavioral tailoring. It's not it's not rocket science, but I think it's different. And we just have to think about it a little bit different if we're talking about something that we're trying to cue to help somebody with their attention, something to help with their memory. That's just not necessarily one of those go-to things that we've addressed as mental health clinicians and practitioners. It's just a little, we're just, moving that dial over just a little bit. So one of the ways that you can kind of do some of this and begin some of this is thinking about, where does this come up, right? In what situations do you see things coming up where somebody might be struggling? That could be with regards to their general functioning. It could be at work. It could be at school. It could be in relationships. Where is it coming up, and what do you know about that problem? So any way that you can ask questions to better understand it, you can check with other team members to see what they notice in different situations. And you can familiarize yourself with some of these checklists that I'm going to show you that have information about recognizing some of that, and then some of the strategies that I'm going to show you next. So in that navigate manual section that I pulled out, so this is part of what I included as materials as part of the training. I just pulled this section out for you. There are a series of checklists that you can go through for those common cognitive difficulty areas that just have a way to say, yep, this is something I struggle with, or no, it's not. So this one is the one for attention and concentration. And now the caveat with this is for supported employment and education. These checklists are geared towards people who are working in school. If you are doing this checklist with somebody who's not, you're going to have to modify it. What I like about the checklist is they give me an idea of where I should start. And based on what they're asking about, I can individualize it based on the person. So it won't be perfect for everybody, but it's a really good resource that gives you a kind of a good starting place. And the point isn't that you're going to identify everything. You're wanting to try to get some key things that might signify this is related more to attention. This is related more to memory. This is related more to kind of problem solving. Give you some direction to really guide you about selecting some intervention ideas or strategies that you can use. So when you're starting out with this, if you've identified what areas it is not going well, you want to kind of ask about when does this happen? You know, getting more of those questions to narrow that focus down and understanding that so that you can begin to start to maybe identify or even select some of those particular coping strategies. And so these are kind of that daily routine. Tell me about what's happened. And I hate this one on Zoom where I can't see my whole slide. There we go. When you're supposed to, whatever that is. What kinds of things get in the way or distract you, right? This is more about the attention, but I would ask it differently if I'm asking about memory. Could you please walk me through that routine? These are the ways that you're going to kind of elicit that information so that you can then practice, use more of a skills training approach to do the intervention. Okay, so now if you move to step 3, which is kind of developing a strategy to signal that behavior, what is the area that they want to improve? One of the key things that you want to think about with cognition is if this were better, what would change? What would be different, right? So is it a specific behavior that's associated with something at home, at something at work, something at school, something in the community? What is it that you're trying to change, and how will we know when that's going better, right? And as part of that, that may also help you of where to direct that compensatory or adaptive approach based on what the goal is. And you may have a different goal than the person does. So it's really important to clarify what is it that they are wanting to achieve. So thinking about compensatory strategies, right? Are there alternative methods to performing that task? There may be something that they typically think they're doing or always seem to do, but might there be a way to kind of come at that from a different angle? Is there a different way to think about that we can achieve that, but come at it from a different side, right? Is there a way that we can use something that they see as a strength to compensate for that areas of weakness, right? Maybe their memory isn't so good, but maybe they're really good at kind of details and keeping notes on things. And so maybe it's about if they write it down, then they don't have to remember it. And so some way to trigger or to cue that ability, this is something I need to write down. Maybe it's not writing it down, maybe it's making a voice memo of it, right? Are there ways that we can use something to adapt to it, to take the place of it? So adaptive strategies are things that change the environment, right? These are memory aids, to-do list, as I was mentioning, that writing things down, linking tasks. These are all ways that you can use to more adaptive strategies. Either one of these will work, and sometimes it's a combination of both. So you don't have to use one versus the other. It's really about finding what works to the person. But you can think of changes in your approach and changes in the environment. Those are the two ways to think about it. Okay, so this is an example of one of those lists that I was talking about. Essentially, in that packet that I included in there are a list of different coping strategies that a person can try to address the things that they're experiencing, right? So this, again, this is the coping strategies for attention and concentration. And it talks about things like scheduling regular breaks, removing distractions from your environment, preparing a special place to work or study, and a personal routine. Say the steps of a task out loud, right? So each one of these is included as possible ways to address it. Some of them deal more with the kind of adapting the environment, and some of them are kind of that new approach, that compensatory approach. You can use one, more, or a combination. Okay, and what I should say is for that section that I included, there is checklists like these for each one. So it's just not that we give you one and say good luck. It's that for each of those different cognitive difficulties, there's a set of strategies that you can use. This is the one for thinking speed, just as a contrast there. You can see how it talks about things like overlearning something, completing time practice tests, finding more efficient ways of doing the task, right? That's different than the suggestions that we put in there for attention and concentration. This one is, again, oh, this is memory. I couldn't see at the top. So this one's all about memory. So what I wanted to show you is, again, you have more of these resources available than you probably noted. One of the things that I struggled with in the beginning when I was kind of learning more about this is, what if I don't know the different coping strategies that I might be able to recommend? This is where this kind of a resource is really helpful, because it's already all built in there. The second part that's in those documents is an explanation and an example for each one of those lists. So just like I was showing you there, there's this list here. Each one of those is then broken down into what do we mean by that? So a description of it. And here's an example of what that looks like. So it's really a rich, rich resource when you kind of look at it and kind of break it down. I wanted to show you a similar resource that's available in that Thinking Skills for Workbook. So this is an example of strategies for improving thinking speed, and the way that they break it down, very similar to what's in that SEE manual, but it gives it an explanation and an example again. So there's a whole nother set of suggestions in that Thinking Skills for Workbook. This is an example of one of the strategies that we use in related to the problem, or this is the problem solving model for the executive functioning difficulties. And so here's an example of one of the things you can do with somebody to break this down is to use that problem solving model, which is a way to come up with additional strategies that somebody might be able to use, and breaking it down to really weigh those, which again, if you think about the mental operation that's involved in doing this, you can see why having it written down and breaking it into these smaller chunks so somebody can see the whole thing put together when you're done could be really helpful for somebody who's struggling with this cognitively. And then the last thing you want to do is you want to practice this, right? Some way for them to see it and then engage in some sort of a role play of this routine, because it's not going to be something that they do take to right away. For some people, it's going to take a repeated set of practice. And the more they can see what it looks like, what it's supposed to look like, and get some experience doing that with you, the more likely that's going to transfer to their day-to-day life. So I'm going to pause here for a minute. Are there any questions that have come up?
Yes, we've got
Okay.
one. The comment is, I like the tailoring component. It's a tremendous comfort knowing there's a term to help clinicians and mental health workers identify a process used almost daily. My question is, sometimes it seems as though the buy-in may be missing regarding the homework and/or follow-up component. Do you have any suggestions to help with motivation to follow through with working independent of the clinician or mental health worker?
It's a really good point. So I think one of the key things there is understanding what's the goal. So one of the things that I've noticed since we focused on cognitive difficulties in particular, working with clinicians, is that there's often a much bigger buy-in from the individual to work on cognitive difficulties than it is symptoms. So cognitive difficulties, people have a real world connection to oftentimes. And I think helping to understand what is this person's real world connection to this and what is their goal will often get you a lot more buy-in and create motivation, right? Because they can very much tell you, yes, this is a problem for me and it's coming up in this way, you know, from time to time. And you can elicit those examples once you start kind of picking apart to understand what this looks like for that person and in what situations this may come up. You'd be surprised about how much they really can get the buy-in that, yeah, this is a problem and I really want to make this better. And that is how you build the motivation. So I do think that this is a bit different from trying to get some of the buy-in around some of the other things that we will often do, because this can be connected to much more real world and often, to be honest, less stigmatizing. It's much less, uncommon for people to admit, yeah, I have trouble with my memory from time to time. I had difficult, concentration, attention and concentration. There's so much that's been in the world these days with people who suffer from ADHD and all kinds of other problems. It's a normal kind of thing that kind of can come up for people, but having those strategies to address it and overcome it can make a really big difference in people's lives. So that's what I would say to kind of build that motivation. All right. What I want to kind of talk about for a minute before we move to the social cognition is what can you do on the ACT team to really address this? One of the things is to think about how each person on the ACT team might be able to identify situations where somebody's experiencing cognitive difficulties. And that doesn't have to be just one person on the team. Each of you are going to see the person perhaps in different kinds of situations and may be able to help pinpoint some of that. When it comes to kind of the next bullet there, which is kind of reviewing and selecting coping strategies, this is where somebody who is working within in those specific settings or situations might be of more help, right? If you're working with them to go back to work, a vocational specialist might be much more prepared to kind of simulate some of these and demonstrate some of these activities related to work than the actual individual therapist that might have more of that general kind of approach. In addition, just about everybody can help practice these skills. And that's what I see myself as one of the biggest advantages to deploying something like this on an ACT team, is that it's not just limited to one person that practices these kinds of coping strategies, that everybody can kind of help somebody if they know about it on the team, if it's well communicated, and talking about when it might come up and when somebody meets one-on-one with somebody, to have the ability to kind of practice that. And then the last thing there is really talking about how is it working? Does anybody on the team notice any difference when they're interacting with that person? Or has the person brought up any sorts of differences that they're noticing? This might allow you to really tweak what kinds of strategies you're doing, what seems to be working and what seems to not be working. But that communication can be really vital. The other thing I think about is, how do you program for success, right? How can we make sure that when we try these out, that we are helping the person to be successful as possible? We often talk about this with home practice. When we send somebody back into their own community or in their environment, how do we help them be successful with their home practice that they're going to do? This is the same kind of a thing, right? any way that we can kind of help people remove some of those distractions, practice some over learning, create some sort of a memory aid, or learn to recognize the signs of a problem. In what way can we help them make sure that when they're going to go out and try it, what is it they need to do to be successful? This is, and I hope this is just review for everybody. This is the list of skills training steps. I put this here to remind each of you, you already know this. You're coming to this table and you may be new to cognition and what we're talking about and recognizing some of that, but the tools that you have, you've had and you've used, and many of you have refined how to do this and how to roll this out. You can do this. Using some of these right tools, getting some increasing your familiarity with them, that's where the newness is. These are ways that you can add some additional environmental supports, right? Encouraging people to talk about these things. It's not always common that we find that people are talking about those cognitive problems or that they come up. They may be really struggling, but it may be something new they haven't talked about, right? Is there a way that we might think about the spaces that people live in, work in, go to school in, that might actually help with some of this? Is there a way that we can adjust some expectations, right? That not all of this, when we talk about cognition, is going to change at once, and not all of it may change to the ability that somebody wants it to. But if we start with one thing at a time, there's a way to kind of start checking this off in some way. Start just a little bit at a time, improving some of this that can really build on it. And even small changes when we're talking about cognition can really have a bigger impact on functioning. Okay. Any questions before I go to social cognition?
None in the Q&A. Any other questions people want to quickly pose?
Okay,
good.
Right, perfect. I'm not going to spend a ton of time on this, but again, my goal here was to show you there are resources out there that can really help with this. And I find that this is something I notice more and more in individuals that I work with. So in one of the newer versions of Illness Management Recovery, in the social support module, there's a topic 5, and I pulled out the handout for that topic just so you could have it and use it. And it's called Understanding Other People. And this is based on the principles of social cognition. And there are 3 parts of this, and I'm going to kind of break them down, but it's recognizing other people's feelings, understanding the other person's point of view, and becoming a feeling detective. Those are the 3 parts. So, and this is a very loose interpretation. For some of this, some of it's pretty close. But I think about recognizing other people's emotions as helping with emotion perception. So you can see here, I pulled out one of the tables from this, this section that talks about different people's facial expression. And it's an ability for somebody to start to kind of talk about, how do you do that? And in what way might you notice that either this is hard for you, or that you don't quite understand things maybe, and that you get into problems. It causes some sort of problem. What does that look like in your day-to-day life? And so this is a way to say, well, how do we gather that information? This talks about the emotion, the facial expression, the voice tone. It gives you, for each of those emotions, it gives you that information. So this is really the content that we were talking about that's specific here for social cognition. But the way that we teach some of these skills can be done using our tried and true practices around skills training, right? We're kind of deploying some of those again. And again, I like to think of a couple of things. I like to think about, I don't think I ever thought about it until I started working and doing some work in the area of social cognition. the amount of mental operations that this takes, but thinking about how do we really recognizing it? How do we put all this information together to really help us determine and then actually react to whatever the other person's emotion might be? And it turns out there's some interesting work in people with schizophrenia where they have them put on these special, I think it's like glasses, and they can tell where somebody looks when they're trying to figure out somebody's emotion on a face. They're given a face and they track, where do their eyes go? Where are they looking? Well, how do we know that this is difficult for people with schizophrenia? Because what we found was they're not looking in the key place most of the time. And the key place is, you can think of it as like a T. It is our eyes and our mouth. Those are the key places. But if you're looking up on your forehead or over here, over here, over here, you're not getting the data that is most telling to help you figure this out. And so these are ways to kind of teach people, what are they looking for? What do those signs look like? And can we practice some of that? The second one is understanding the other person's point of view, which is similar to theory of mind, right? So theory of mind, you can kind of think of is, what is somebody thinking about, right? What is it that's going on that's telling you that, right? That person's point of view. It's also kind of like empathy, right? That's kind of what we're talking about. And again, thinking about what are the mental operations that are involved in making those judgments, right? This is an example from that handout that talks about how do we assess that and how do we teach that? What are ways that people can get better at doing that, right? Knowing what people might be thinking. And if we know that, how that might be helping them socially, right? And socially may mean it's really the ends to a piece of their goal that they really need to accomplish. The third one, this is the looser one, is becoming that feeling detective, right? Where you're exploring opportunities where somebody might be making some of those not as informed assumptions about things, right? Thinking about where they may be doing something like jumping to a conclusion. And if we approach it that sometimes we need to take a step back, sometimes we need to slow it down, sometimes we need to really look at the evidence that we have in this situation. That's that feeling detective. That's that ability to kind of, slow it down and see what's going on, what we know and what we don't really know, and how do we do that? This is a way to practice some of that. So the content may be really new for some of you. It may not be for others, but the strategies that you do to get somebody to practice this, to teach this, these are the same. And so what I was hoping to do today is really kind of introduce you to some of that new content that you can really explore on your own, and know that if you use some of our tried and true tools, you can actually help people with this and make a big difference. Okay, these are these resources that I mentioned again. So there's that piece of the Navigate manual, which that all the manuals for Navigate are available for free, which is what that website will bring you to. This is the store where that version of IMR is sold, and I gave you that one handout example of that. And then for people who are interested, this is the Thinking Skills for Workbook, and I was going to suggest that if people are interested, I can pass along one of the coupons for the book that Kim gave me, so that people can get a discount on that book if they're interested. So the last thing I want to leave you with is just thinking about, what can you do now that you know this information? What can you do? So one of the first things you can do is think about someone you may be working with that you could go back and identify where they may be struggling with something related to cognition, right? So are there situations that you might be able to observe in the next week? Might you be able to kind of think about or even start looking at some of those checklists from the SCE manual about things you might notice or specific coping skills that are associated with some of those? Once you do that, trying to select one of those and then practice it on a regular basis, not only for you to practice it, but encouraging other members of the ACT team to help that person practice it in different situations. And then evaluating in what way does that improve that person's functioning, either cognitively or for social cognition. So hopefully this feels like it's a really practical kind of thing that you can take back and use, and know that some of the skills that you've used in other situations, you can actually apply to cognition and social cognition as well. I believe that should be the last one. So I'm going to stop my share here.
Thank you so much, Piper.
Yeah.
Any questions, further questions? Let's see, we've got another one in the Q&A. So with the assessment forms, have you ever thought about automating the data on the forms with Excel and or equivalent type of program?
It's certainly a possibility. I mean, again, I am not knee deep in this all the time, but I think given the telehealth situation that we're in, I think it's a really interesting idea. I think it would be interesting to kind of, track this for people on your team just to see what you're seeing.
You have make it a little bit easier to be able to track. Yep.
For sure.
You did get some folks who put in the chat that they wanted the coupon. Were you wanting just a subset? Like if people want it, there would be a targeted distribution of that, or is it something that can be shared more?
What I can do is I can share it like I sent you the handouts, Maria, and then you're free to distribute it. Kim gave it to me, so he said that we could share it. So
okay, perfect. So just know that if you requested it, that you'll get it, and if you haven't requested it, you're going to get it anyway. So we'll just send it out to the group. I figure more than just the few people that said that in the chat wanted it.
I mean, I think they want to get the book out there for people to use.
We already got a yay to the coupon, so that's good. Thanks,
I
Jennifer.
knew that would be something that would be attractive, and I was really appreciative for Kim to share that. So,
you also did some kind of free advertising for some other interventions, obviously, in there. And I just was curious if, I know one of the other topics we talked about for today was IMR, and if there was anything else you wanted to say about maybe how kind of starting something like IMR might extend or start some of the conversations that you were talking about today, even if you can't get into IMR as a topic just yet.
Sure. So what I would say is that the thing about IMR and it related not only to this one topic, but to, if you think about some of the other difficulties we talked about, is because it's a structured intervention, it's already broken down in ways to help people address some of the cognitive difficulties that they may be facing. So if you aren't doing IMR, but you're considering it, or if you have been doing it and thinking about how you're using it, right, it offers this way to kind of really reach people who may be struggling with a variety of different issues. So the thing about it is, and it also taps into that piece that was asked about earlier around motivation. How do we get people invested in actually making some of these changes? And you do that through goals. And IMR has a really great way to really help people around goals. And so it's actually something, Maria, we should talk about at some point, because we've added to some of that with IRT and talking about goals. And I've done some of that work with ACT teams as well. So around strengths. So that would be
great.
Yeah.
Excellent. Any other questions for Piper? Do you want to get that one, Lorna? Oh. Get the comment, send me an email and I'll share the assessment form I developed. So that's great, with doctors performing heart procedures. Nice. Use the model as a template for what we were talking about. So nice. That's very cool.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I see one question in the chat about experience applying this in groups.
So I'm trying to think. We haven't done a lot with the the handouts that I showed you from Navigate. That has not been done, I would say, significantly in a group intervention. IMR has been done in both individual and group interventions. There's nothing to say that you couldn't use those handouts in a group intervention. You want to understand that people are going to be struggling with different amounts of them. Mm-hmm. So what you're dealing with in a group intervention, if you're specifically addressing some of those cognitive issues, is that everybody's going to come in there with a different kind of mixture of them. And so you have to be pretty skilled, I would say, to be able to address the whole and not feel like you're ending up doing individual therapy in a group. So it just takes, I think, a little bit more work if you're going to kind of go more into those cognitive difficulties. Not that you can't, it's that you need to be aware of what people might be coming into there struggling with.
We had a question too about IMR, if that's best done by group or individually, Piper. And I know.
I think there's pros and cons,
yeah,
is what I would say. So here's what I typically say. The recovery strategies module, I think, is best done individually. If I had my druthers, I would say that really needs to be done individually, that you maximize getting somebody's motivation up and their participation and engagement in it if you do it individually. My sense is that when it's done as a group and that is included as part of that group rollout, you miss something and you don't get, individuals aren't as fully engaged as they could be. So that's my only caveat, is that I think it's great when it's done in a group. The one thing is that recovery strategies really turns out you get much better buy-in if you do that individually. Now, the pros and the cons, I think, are that when it's done as a group, you often get this amazing kind of buy-in around group participation, and everybody's in it together, and everybody really ends up supporting and really encouraging each other. And that benefit you don't get if you do it individually. However, if you're doing it individually, you can really meet the person where they're at. And the focus is truly on getting their motivation and really individualizing each of the approaches. So it's about weighing those and, seeing, sometimes it's what you can offer, right? Sometimes it comes down to, this is what we can offer, so we're going to roll it out the best we can. But you get benefits, I think, for both.
Is there any particular topic you think would be better for the group, Piper?
I think the social support is better for a group,
mm-hmm.
right? When you're doing that in a group and you can actually do role plays together, and you can have them where people get to practice them right there with you, and there's other peers that can comment them and show and see, talk about things that they see. I think that can be particularly helpful. I also think the one around, and I forget the name now, about it's very last one about advocacy. I also think that's really done well as a group, because I'm often blown away about the resources and advocacy that individuals really figure out and can share with each other. So that's another one I think that's done really well.
I'm already seeing a future topic, Piper, clearly, because there's some questions
about
IMR. So.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, I think we should probably shift gears into our open mic time, but we really appreciate you taking the time to meet with us today. And I'm excited to hear more about some of the other work you've been doing with ACT Team, so we can incorporate that into some of our national calls too. So
absolutely.
Thanks so much.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it. I'm going to pop off and let you do the rest of your meeting. So thank you very much.
Okay.
Thanks.
All right. Happy November. All right. I'll just shift. Does that look correct?
Yes. So we are going to shift. We're going to cover a little bit of material we typically start with, but we thought flow-wise, we're going to start bringing this up more in front of our open mic session. So, and because we're on the Zoom platform, you guys have a chance to see who each other is and where you're coming from, which is not something we had with GoToWebinar. Hence why we wanted to emphasize where people were tending to come from with our bigger series that we've been doing for the past year and a half. So these are a series of maps to just show kind of like where we were. This is from May, and it's showing positive case rates in terms of COVID. Because part of this, again, is to appreciate kind of like we're all been operating in a very unusual environment, and you guys in particular already was doing such hard, important work. And then here comes a pandemic, and you're working to serve a very vulnerable population. And the whole model is designed to be in the community, hands-on, helping people. And you're trying to figure out how to do this as safely as possible. So we want to kind of like be mindful of kind of the environment in which you guys have been operating in. So back in May, here's where we were. We were all like excited about summer. We thought life was good unless you lived in Michigan and things were already flaring up. And then the next slide, we have now, this was in September when we're in the throes of a Delta hitting many of us. And now the next slide is showing where are we at now. So some of us are experiencing this sense of reprieve. Things are starting to decrease again. Vaccination rates are going up, which is another slide. But a lot of you guys out there in Wyoming and Montana, you're going through your own like peak right now. So it's not necessarily settled down everywhere. Next slide, we're going to see vaccination rates. Back in May, we're still in an earlier phase of things. Next slide, we have as of today, it's getting darker green in most places, but we're showing some improvement here. And then the next slide is another indicator that has been important, because the more we test, the more you're also going to catch positive cases. Hospitalizations is an indicator that really is telling us important information in terms of how much are we getting grabbing on and managing this thing that probably will always be with us now. So back in September, here's how things were looking in terms of current hospitalizations. And then here's where we're at now. And again, not surprising, it's shifting. So again, big part of the nation is feeling that reprieve. We're exhaling. Our inpatient medical community, who have been absolute rock stars, and we've exhausted every last bit of them, are exhaling, but we still have some problems, as you can see up there with our friends in Montana and Wyoming in particular. So this is where we've been. So we hope that when we get to see you in January, that we're going to continue to be able to show more maps of encouragement. And so with that, we're kind of just pivoting to kind of have this open mic time, because we love that we've been able to bring in special guests like Piper. And I saw the many positive comments of really valuing the information she brought. But we also want to create space for you guys to just pose questions to each other. Sometimes we can weigh in, but really trying to get you and your ideas too. So this could be through the Q&A. It also can be where you're raising your hand, and then Justin will see that your hand went up, confirm you want to come off the mic or off mute, and then speak to us out loud.
I think that's when we get kind of the richest time, honestly, is when we kind of at least get a few people who are willing to check in with us in person through unmuting. So it's not too hard. It's not too scary, promise.
So a common question that comes up that's in the chat box is really, and this was has been a focus in our meetings, is how to navigate life with people who have chosen not to get vaccinated. So for this person, kind of bringing up the idea that, we have a rule that we weren't driving clients who were unvaccinated, but also having some unvaccinated staff was kind of throwing a new wrinkle in this. So how have teams been dealing with this? So we know that there's been some federal and state mandates that have come out that may have influenced how people are informing their decisions. I know that people have shared some stress of, trying to balance, wanting to encourage vaccination for the sake of increasing overall safety of the work, but also worried about losing staff who really were making a hard no, position and not wanting to stress the team out by having staff turnover. So if anybody wants to share how you've been dealing with it, that's one question that's been put out there.
Yeah, and feel free, I mean, it's in the chat right now, so feel free to just, add anything in there related to how you've dealt with it, or again, raise your hand and we'll have you speak more about your experience with that. Any thoughts from folks? We had quite a bit of conversation about this 2 months ago when we were last talking about Delta and just having a pretty big mix of folks vaccinated and not. Anyone?
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
hand up.
Should I go ahead and unmute them since we have just a few? Susan, you're unmuted.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello.
Hi, Susan.
It's so just the whole vaccination subject is, as you all know, just very stressful. So on our team, our little bitty team, there's 9 staff in total. 2 staff are still not vaccinated, and I would say a little under half of our clients are still not vaccinated. So it's, walking the line, because, you have to be respectful of everybody, and not that I wouldn't want to be, but we know that it increases the risk of all kinds of things happening. So it's just been, very frustrating. I think for the most part, our team has dealt with it pretty well. We've had one staff member who's had to quarantine quite a few times, which has gotten to be very stressful for other staff, again, because we have a small team and other people have to cover. And so just dealing with that in itself, people having different beliefs about basically everything that's going on in our country in our small little world,
Sure. Yeah.
So, the St. Louis County, they employ over 100 people, but we're still waiting to hear how they're going to deal with the mandate.
Right.
And of course,
yeah, just for everybody. So basically, if you are receiving Medicaid funds and doesn't the employee number matter for that or not?
yes.
It does. So you have to have at least 100 employees and you're receiving Medicaid funds. Then there's a federal mandate that you either get vaccinated or you participate in twice a week or once a week testing.
I think it's once a week.
Once a week, right. So, which I believe this is Lorna's personal opinion, I think was a reasonable option to try to honor choice. And quite honestly, information will continue to change. There's already talk right now about, do we look at people who have natural antibodies and the science behind that? So I think that we're going to continue to see some evolution around what we're seeing to be indicators of being safe enough. But I think that the heart of this, with what you're hitting at too, we're working with a vulnerable population that already is so high risk for so many health issues. And if they get COVID and end up in the hospital, the probability of a much more dire consequence is so much higher. And so that is such a concern, is knowing that the risks are so high for people who have so many comorbid health concerns to begin with. And we do have research to show that part that came out this past year.
Exactly. So I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's,
I know.
it's really hard because, you know, as the team lead, I have to filter all the questions, all the thoughts, all the beliefs, all the personal values.
Right.
And I have my own very strong ones as
Right.
well. You know, so yeah, it's been very challenging.
Yep.
You know, I just looked today at our numbers, and in our county, which is a huge county in northern Minnesota, just what I gotta look again. I just can't get over it. Our numbers have been extremely high.
Yeah, I noticed Minnesota had some darker colors of not the good kind of dark. I don't remember. I think dark is bad in all the maps, but
Right.
as you know, vaccine was dark. But yeah, that you guys definitely have spots. You know, and I see Jacqueline, you know, and Jacqueline's in Virginia brought up our agency's not yet mandating vaccine, but anticipates it will happen in the next couple of months. So we're going to continue to see how organizations are dealing with this and the precedent that's being set, because I think that's the other thing is that, you know, we're still looking at legally, what are some of the organizations able to do here? And I think the small organizations are waiting to see what the precedent is before they make any hard moves.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for bringing that up. I know it's on everybody's mind. This is definitely a common theme, and definitely in the space of having 154 other people who struggle with this.
Right.
There was actually a question. I know we've got a couple of hands up, but just a question about if any facilities have laid out off healthcare employees because they refuse to be COVID vaccinated. I know that's something we've contended with in Washington State. We've now started to learn of different team members leaving because, or let go because they weren't vaccinated by the date that they needed to be in our state. It sounds like this is true in Atlanta, where Charles is writing from. We've seen a couple of other responses too, where that has been the case, where there have been mandates and then now those are going into effect.
Okay, we have the next person is Lori. Lori, you can unmute yourself.
Hey, my name is Lori Lopez. I'm out in Florida, in Orlando to be specific. We had kind of a unique stance as a team. Our company put on clinics for us to be vaccinated if we chose to. And after the first wave, where many of our team members did get sick, we all took part in it just because it knocked about half of the team out at once. We also had a couple of client deaths. So our clients really pushed being vaccinated as well. So much so that we put on small clinics for them to receive their vaccination in kind of a timely fashion, just because it's easier for us to deal with our clients than other people to deal with their clients. You know, they know us, they believe that we're not going to hurt them, so it's a little bit easier. But I think that was kind of an outlier on what is happening across the nation, just because it hit our team really, really hard in Orlando. And, you know, we had a most recent death in May from COVID, and it actually wiped out one of our families. So from our standpoint, you know, we didn't need to be supportive because we were being inundated with, when are you guys going to do this? When are you guys going to take us? Like, where do we meet you? Which I think is different than what I'm hearing across the nation. But I think it's because a lot of our people were very used to knowing each other, and now, their people and their surroundings are disappearing.
Yeah.
So that was a very unique transition for our team as a whole. One, because, we weren't healthy enough to take them all at once. And two, just like the demand of moving that quantity of people.
Yeah.
It was something that we were not aware that we would have to do.
Right.
Especially during COVID time specifically, where there's the whole social distancing and mandates and so on and so forth. We even have a policy where if we go to see a client, we have extra masks in a baggie to give to them if needed, just so that they can stay clean and safe.
Right.
But it's been quite left field here from what I'm hearing.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's varied quite a bit in like your story. I was bringing up Aaron Beck earlier, and this kind of comes to mind around, having those kind of like distortions or your way of thinking of the world, or how safe you are and how unsafe you are. And when the evidence starts penetrating your real world experience of, the whole family is gone, or these friends of mine, this is impacting, then it just kind of regrounds you into maybe seeing this differently again and seeing the risk of it differently again. So it sounds like for some of the communities that really did get hard, and we know Florida, you really went through it too, that I can see how those personal experience may have penetrated some of the way in which people were thinking about it. And I think your point of bringing the clinics, I would encourage, Susan, you bringing up that example, is don't give up on reintroducing the idea of the vaccine and really thinking about how to make access as easy as possible. And we've heard a lot of nice examples of where teams and agencies have organized and partnered with the pharmacist, or created this half-day event that brings people together, may have food, something that kind of makes this the thing, and just keep trying to plug away at some of that ambivalence. Because I still believe there's people out there that they're in a place of ambivalence around this. They're not a hard no yet. And so continuing to reintroduce it and look at access.
There's also a question about if any agencies are allowing weekly testing in lieu of the vaccine, and if any agencies are paying for that testing. I know that a couple of you were very interested in that question. If that others want to either put into the chat in response to that, we'll know that which question you're answering at that moment. How much that's actually happening. City of Alexandria is offering testing and paying for it. Molly, is that also, are you saying too that the weekly testing is potentially an option instead of getting vaccinated to keep a position in, okay, direct healthcare? One of these questions has got some legal implications that I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer that one. Is there a way to legally ask the refuser to explain and justify their views? Same thing on mandating education on risks and benefits. Thoughts on that?
We also have another hand up.
Okay. Is there anything on that one, Lorna, you want to?
Oh, I agree. I think that this is too, we have rules
sticky
from the federal level in terms of who receiving much money. And I thought that the Fed still allowed for testing if you were opting out.
Mm-hmm.
And I even thought that they said the employer needed to give you the time to go get the test. Like it's not like on Saturday, if you work Monday through Friday. But yeah, I think that it's going to be too touchy for us to try to get into things of what's legal and not legal.
Yeah. You want to go ahead with the person that raised their hand, Justin?
Sure. Is that me? You hear me?
Yes.
Hey, I'm so glad to be back. So I'm Stacy and I work with Lorna at the Institute. And I just, of course, wanted to add my 2 cents. So I think that I heard on NPR, so I'm going to take that as a fairly reliable source, that most people who are vaccine hesitant now, when they polled, were really vaccine hesitant rather than anti-vaccine. So whether it's underlying medical conditions or just not having been convinced of the safety. And so one of the things that they recommended, I endorse as someone who does motivational interviewing training, is as much as we can get them to talk to whomever they think is an expert in sort of the professional realm, like nurses, doctors, etc., to talk about that. They may have an underlying condition, etc., that's really making them concerned about it. A doctor, maybe even a specialist, can help address whether or not that vaccine is going to make that underlying condition worse. I put in the chat just a super short 13-minute recorded webinar on demand. I can get you the link if you don't get it right now. That it's super short, could be helpful with both staff and folks we work with. And then I just looked up the booster, and at least with the CDC, if you just honestly, I just Googled booster criteria. So it's still typically older folks, 65 and older, and then 18 plus in long-term care settings, or having underlying medical conditions or high risk. So I think you can Google some of that information. But I just wanted to put out there to all of us that are working with this, it was heartening to me to hear that most people who don't have it right now are truly hesitant and not necessarily anti-vaccine.
Thank you, Stacy. So we're only have about 4 more minutes, and we expect that this will be an important topic of conversation that will continue to come up because we're all continuing to live through it together. And I understand kind of the complexities involved, including the comment that was shared around just not really liking to track the status of vaccinations of staff, feeling like it's crossing a line of privacy. And we can understand that. I think it comes down to, are you able to safely perform the role you were hired to do by remaining unvaccinated? And if you're masking up, is that enough? And I think it's, something that we're going to continue to learn and understand by way of the data that keeps coming out and being interpreted around, like, what is safe? What's the risk? We with Delta have experienced that, of course, we have these breakthrough cases and you think you're vaccinated and you're okay. And then you actually get really sick with it. But what we also learned is it doesn't necessarily land you in the hospital in the ICU with death. So we will be continuing to learn together. We are meeting again in 2022. And so our next meeting will be January 3rd. So we'll be freshly celebrating what we hope to be an even better year, as we keep, begging for better years every year. And we had decided that our topic of interest, we think for January, just to get that set up in your head, will likely be around people who are involved in the justice system and are served by ACT teams. And we'll talk about Forensic ACT in particular. So for those of you who are involved with Forensic Act teams and have some really seasoned experience around this, and if you're interested in being part of a panel, please reach out to us. We'll be assembling a panel. Typically, we try to keep it to about 4 or so people, but we may be outreaching you if we know who you are too. So the next time we meet, we'll be talking about those who are involved in the criminal justice system. All of you serve people who are involved in the criminal justice system, but there also is a special implementation of ACT that really kind of focuses on that population in particular. So that's Forensic Act. We hope you liked our new platform too, and you get to quickly grab this evaluation and give us feedback. And I'm sure some of it is you guys loved finally seeing each other's chats and talking to each other in that way, because we didn't have that option when we were meeting with GoToWebinar. But it's another place where we really appreciate getting your feedback and ideas for future topics as well.
I'm gonna pull it out and put it in the chat real quick here too in our remaining minute or so here. Hold, please. It's not as simple as you guys clicking on the screen here. All right.
I know.
Yeah, and we are very serious here about just getting feedback from you all. I think we've had most of our calls have been guided by feedback you've given us on past calls, and just, you know, what worked well, what do you want to see more of, what do you want to see less of. So it's really helpful for us to see that. And so please, if you don't mind just clicking on that link before you log out here and completing, it's very short, quick survey. Super helpful for us. We definitely use that information. While it is a requirement from SAMHSA, which funds our MHTTC, our training center, it's something that we just collaboratively really take into account as we continue to move forward. So thanks so much, you guys, for joining us. Our last meeting of 2021.
Yeah. Lay off the Halloween candy. I feel like it's been my breakfast, lunch, and upcoming dinner appetizer for the day.
That's why I came into the office today.
Get away from it. Oh my gosh, I know. I'm like, milk duds, milk duds.
All right, you guys.
All right.
Have a good rest of your 2021. We'll see you guys next year, but please don't hesitate to reach out. And certainly, again, as Lorna said, if you're interested in participating in our panel in January, let us know. Happy holidays.
Yeah.
See you later. Stay safe and healthy for sure.